Just after 3 p.m. on July 22nd, 2003, 28-year-old Kirsty Brown, along with her dive buddy, entered the icy cold water just off the Rothera Research Station in Antarctica. Kirsty, who was a marine biologist working for the British Antarctic Survey, was there to study iceberg scouring and its effect on the local wildlife and their habitat. She had set up a bunch of equipment in this bay, and she needed to surface swim out into the bay to check on this equipment. On the shore, there were two other people acting as safety personnel, and they had an inflatable boat. So again, just after 3, Kirsty and her dive buddy, who were both wearing dry suits, dive computers, and snorkeling gear, not scuba gear, they got in the water and they began to surface swim out to go check on this equipment. When they got about 25 meters or 80 feet off of shore, all of a sudden, this huge dark shape left some nearby rocks, and just under the surface of the water, it began to rapidly approach Kirsty. Now, Kirsty's dive buddy could see that Kirsty could see this thing coming at her, but she didn't seem immediately concerned until this thing reached her, and then it circled her and grabbed her by the leg, and then it started tugging her under the surface of the water, at which point Kirsty began to scream. Now, when she started screaming, the safety personnel on the shore, they began to ready the boat to come to her aid. At the same time, Kirsty's dive buddy began to swim over to her. But before they could reach her, Kirsty was pulled under the surface of the water. She was only down there for a few seconds before she resurfaced, and when she did, resurfacing with her was an enormous leopard seal. It had her by the leg in its mouth, and she was fighting with it, trying to get away from it, but they were only on the surface for a few seconds before it tugged at her again and pulled her back beneath the surface. By the time the dive buddy got up to the place where it had pulled her underneath, they looked under the water using their goggles, and they could see her under the surface of the water some 5 to 10 meters, so maybe 30 feet or so deep, and she was just being pulled down into the darkness by this leopard seal, which still had her by the leg or by the swim fin in its mouth. And they could see her clawing, trying to swim back to the surface, but this thing was not letting her go. Well, at this point, the dive buddy, they just turned around and swam back to shore because really there was nothing they could do to help. By this time, they've got the safety boat in the water, so those two people on the shore, they're now out in the boat, and they're out looking for her, and they motored around for a full 6 minutes looking for any sign of Kirsty, but they didn't see any. Now, we know from Kirsty's dive computer that eventually this leopard seal took her down to a depth of 70 meters or 230 feet under the surface of the ocean. I can't imagine how terrifying that would be, and of course, I don't know how long she was conscious for, but regardless, as she's being dragged down to the ocean floor, she would have known at some point that she's too deep and she's not coming back up again. And she didn't. Until, again, 6 minutes after this thing initially took her, the leopard seal resurfaced. And when it did, it was about 1,000 meters, so over half a mile away from where it initially took her, but it still had Kirsty in its mouth. When the boat motored up to this leopard seal, they saw that Kirsty was floating face down on the surface. The leopard seal had her in its jaws by the head, and it was just dragging her around on the surface. One of the guys in the boat, he grabbed a shovel and he began to beat at the seal until eventually it let her go. And when it did, they grabbed her, pulled her on the boat, took her back to the research station. At this point, it was about 10 minutes after she was initially taken. The doctor there at the research station worked on her for about an hour, trying to resuscitate her with CPR, but unfortunately, she had just been without oxygen for too long. She had drowned and she was pronounced deceased. There's a lot of misinformation about this case out there. If you're going to look into it, I highly suggest that you just Google the actual inquest and download the PDF that has all accurate information from the official investigation. Don't just go off what you hear on here or on YouTube or wherever else.